Hi, welcome to Defcon 3. I'm KT McFarland. The Sochi Olympics are going to start in about a week's time in Russia. It's in the heart of the Chechen terrorist region, and some people have said that maybe we should reconsider canceling the Olympics. Some American teams are even reconsidering their participation. Well, to get to the bottom of it all, we've asked David Gartenstein-Ross. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and I think one of the leading terrorist experts in the world. We want to get the straight story from David. You've written about the Sochi Olympics. You've long warned about the Chechen terrorist movements. What's your take on what's going to happen in Sochi?
It's hard to say. One could look at it in a couple of ways. You have, obviously, telegraphing of a blow. Doku Umarov, the head of the Caucasus Emirate, has said that he would strike at the Olympics. You had last month a twin suicide bombing in Volgograd, after which the suicide bombers appeared on tape saying that was only a warning and that there'd be something far greater at the Olympics themselves. But expectations are so high right now that if terrorists try to strike and have, for example, a bomber caught, or else they shoot and kill one or two people, that it's going to seem like they've utterly failed. So they could end up just waiting out the Olympics. But that being said, this is by far the most dangerous Olympics that we've seen in terms of the threat of terrorism. Okay, well, let's pursue that. So what's so different? Why, we've had terrorist attacks at the Olympics before, most famously 1972 in Munich. Why is this one much worse, and what are people doing about it? Well, the thing that makes it worse is the terrorist campaign that you've had against Russia, which demonstrates both the intent to strike and also lethal capability to do so. You've had a campaign that's been going on for well over a decade, which has included strikes against some very difficult targets. In 2011, for example, you had a suicide bomber strike at the Moscow airport. You've had bombings on the subways of Moscow. You had twin suicide bombers about a decade ago take down 2 Russian airplanes simultaneously. This is a movement that has shown very lethal capabilities, and we haven't seen anything similar, not in China, not with the Uyghur separatists, not in London, which hadn't seen the sustained campaign like this since the IRA. What that means is that you have an intention to not just carry out select attacks like we saw in Munich, but perhaps mass attacks that makes this much more, in the view of most every expert, much more perilous.
And so what about the cost of all this?
The cost is enormous. You have about 40,000 security officers on scene with checkpoints, bomb-sniffing dogs. In fact, paying attention to the cost of hosting the Olympics is extraordinarily important. If you look at Greece's current absolute financial straits, the hosting the Olympics in 2004 plays more of a role than most people realize, because they won that bid in 1997 prior to the 9/11 attacks. Suddenly you had 9/11. The cost of security jumped up, was just multiplied for Greece. Then, of course, you had the 2008 global financial collapse, which meant they couldn't profit from their investment in the way that they had hoped to do. Hosting the Olympics has gone from being a boon to host countries to being an enormous cost, and fewer countries can really sustain those kind of costs.
Talk to me about the Ring of Steel. I met with the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia right before Christmas, and he talked about Sochi, he talked about the security, talked about the enormous amount of money they were spending to build up the whole region, build the hotels, build the Olympic Village, and obviously the protection zone around the region. Now, Putin said that there's a ring of steel through which terrorists will not penetrate. But then I've got to ask the obvious question, well, what about the rest of Russia? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, that's precisely correct. Not just what about the rest of Russia, but what about just outside the perimeter of the Ring of Steel? If you look back at the Moscow airport attack in 2011, we normally think of airports as being hard targets. But in fact, they're soft targets until you get to the security perimeter. And so a suicide bomber in 2011 struck just outside the security perimeter in the Moscow airport. Likewise, carrying out a bombing in, say, a waiting crowd that's waiting to go through a security checkpoint is just as effective as going through the checkpoint and then carrying out the bombing. Likewise, even though you're going to have teams of people searching for bombs, searching for terrorists in these areas, striking, say, in the next city over is something that will also draw attention to the cause. So there's multiple opportunities that terrorists have to strike. That's one reason that the Russians have been so aggressive about actively hunting down the 3 Black Widow suspects who they've publicly identified.
To a certain extent, David, haven't they already won? Haven't the terrorists already won if you look at the worldwide attention brought to this?
Yes, in many ways. There's a number of victories that they've already gotten. One is, of course, the attention that they've already drawn and the palpable fear that they've been able to cast over the games, with even U.S. Lawmakers weighing in and saying they wouldn't send their families, discussions about whether we shouldn't send our teams, and the enormous cost that they've been able to impose upon the games is also testament to just how much they're able to influence multiple countries through being effective at the kind of violence that they're able to carry out.
David, one last question. If you're a betting man, what do you think is going to happen at the Sochi Olympics next week?
It's always difficult to bet. I mean, nobody has a perfect crystal ball. And in past Olympic Games, I would have thought it was more likely than not that there would not be a terrorist attempt. I'll go only as far as saying that if I were placing a bet, I would bet that there would be a terrorist attempt. As to what happens, whether it succeeds, whether it kills people, I really don't know. And as I made clear in my very first answer, even the notion that there will be a terrorist attempt may in itself not be correct. There's nothing, KT, that's inevitable in this world except for public celebrity meltdowns.
Well, I don't think I can top that one. David Gartenstein-Ross, who's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, thank you very much. And maybe next time we have you on, you can talk to us about Justin Bieber. What do you think?
That's exactly what I'm studying right now, KT.
Thanks so much for joining us, and that's it for Defcon 3.